Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So thank you all for coming as always, and welcome to the Monday meeting. And we'll continue today or tonight our commentary on Kitab, at-Tawheed. We have reached the 16th chapter, and we're in a section of the book, as we discussed previously, where the Imam is responding to two common spacious arguments or dubious assertions of the idolaters, whether they be Muslims or non-Muslims. And the first one of those he began addressing in the previous chapter, and he'll continue in this chapter. And that is the argument that we offer acts of worship. These Muslim idolaters or non-Muslim idolaters will say, we offer these acts of worship to these saintly individuals, these holy personalities, or even holy things, or saintly things, if you will. Sometimes it's an object that they offer act of worship to. And they say because they believe that these saintly personalities, they have some type of independent power or independent ability to help or to harm. They have this belief. So this is the first argument that they put forward. And the Imam has been refuting that, or he began refuting that in the previous chapter, in which he basically clarified that the greatest of Allah's creatures, which is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in general, and the greatest of his human creatures specifically, the most righteous, the most virtuous of mankind, despite his nearness and dearness to Allah, he is Khalilullah, the friend of Allah. He has no independent power to help himself, let alone to help others or to protect them from harm. And if this is the case for the greatest of Allah's creatures, the most virtuous of Allah's creatures, it should be the same for those who are lesser than him in rank. Is that not so? It should be even more true for those who are lesser than him in rank. So then the Imam, he follows that chapter with the perfect complementary chapter, where he leaves the human realm and goes to the realm of what? The unseen world, right? The greatest beings in the unseen world being the angels, Mumtaz. And he points out that the greatest of the angels, which is Jibreel, as we're going to see, and if this is true for Jibreel, it's certainly true for those angels in general who are lesser than him in rank, they don't possess any independent ability to help themselves or to help or harm others, but rather they themselves, before Allah, in front of Allah, are powerless to do anything for themselves, let alone for others. And if this is true for the angels, as powerful as they are, as strong as they are, as massive as they are, as capable as they are, it's going to be even more true for those who are lesser than them in rank. So this is what the Imam is setting out to do in this chapter. And he begins it with the verse from Surah Saba. He begins it with the verse from Surah Saba, verse number 21. But before we mention that, I want to digress briefly, because we said that Jibreel is the greatest of the angels. So the scholars of Islam are all in agreement, as mentioned by as-Suyuti in his book Tanwir al-Hawalik. He mentions that the scholars of Islam are in unanimous agreement that there are four angels who are the best, greatest, most virtuous, the most superior of all the angels. That if we rank the angels, there are four that are at the very top. Jibreel, the angel Gabriel, Michael, Israfil, and Malik al-Maut. So Gabriel, what does he do? Anybody know his wadhifa, his job? Ahsan. He's the one who is entrusted, or he is commissioned with Allah to bring his revelations, okay, to carry his revelations to his prophets and messengers. Mikael, right, he's the one who is responsible for driving the clouds, making it rain wherever Allah wills for it to rain, and making crops sprout forth as a consequence of that rain. Israfil, Ahsan, he's the one who will blow into the trumpet, signaling the beginning or the end of the world and then the beginning of the day of judgment. Mumtaz. And Malik al-Maut, the angel of death, right? These are the four greatest angels, according to the scholars, without disagreement. But after that, they disagree about which one of these four is the best. And all the evidence points to Gabriel being the best of them, the greatest of them. And among the indications of his superiority or his supremacy, one is that he's al-muwakkal bil-wahi. He's the one who is responsible for receiving Allah's revelation and carrying it to his prophets and messengers. And this is a tremendous station or status or job that's not going to be given to just any of the angels, right? Secondly, when you look at the adiyah and al-adhkar, when you look at the supplications and the different words of remembrance, different formulas of remembrance where we're asked to mention the angels in the course of some type of dhikr we're going to make for Allah. So for example, when we wake up for the night prayer, the Prophet taught us to say, Allahumma Rabba, Jibra'il, wa Mika'il, wa Israfil. If you notice, whenever the angels are mentioned in any type of dhikr, the first one mentioned is Gabriel, indicating what? His supremacy, right? So in this case, Allah said, the Prophet taught us to say when we wake up at night, O Allah, Lord of Gabriel and Michael and Israfil. You guys see that? Another indication that he is the greatest angel, and we're going to see this in the text that we're going to look at today, is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks his decree, this causes all the angels to be gripped with fear to the extent that in one of the ahadith it says su'iqu. They what? They all faint. They all faint from what? The thunderous boom of Allah's voice. They faint from it. When they faint, the first one to awaken is who? Gabriel. Shows what? Exactly, his superiority and his immense strength, right? And when he awakens, Allah gives him what? Al-wahy. And then the other angels, when they awaken, they ask, ماذا قال ربكم? As we're going to see. What did our Lord say? Who tells them? Who gives them the answer? Gabriel. What does that show you? Right, he's superior. You guys see that? So for this reason, or because these reasons, the scholars have opined, or some of the scholars have opined, that Gabriel is what? The most supreme of the angels, or the greatest of the angels. Let's go now look at some of the texts, or the texts that the Imam shared to support what we've been saying for the past few weeks, that saintly persons, no matter how saintly they are, no matter how virtuous they are, no matter how pious they are and close to Allah they are, they're not entitled to any worship. And they can't do anything for us, right? And if we worship them and we devote these acts of worship with them with the greatest amount of sincerity, they won't be able to help us or harm us. And so therefore they're not entitled to any worship. They themselves are in need of Allah's help. So he mentions the ayah from Surah Saba in which it says, and it's actually verse number 23. I think I said 21. It's actually verse number 23. حتى إذا فزع عن قلوبهم قالوا ماذا قال ربكم قالوا الحق وهو العلي الكبير. So basically, the meaning of the verse is, as it's translated, until fear has left their hearts, they say, and upon fear leaving their hearts, they say, what is it that your Lord has said? They say the truth, and he is the most high, the most great. So the word fuzzi'a, the asl, the origin of it, or the root of it, is al-faza'. And al-faza' basically means fear, being terrified, being alarmed, being in a state of what? Extreme distress. So when Allah says fuzzi'a, as we're going to see, it means that this state of being distressed, al-faza', has what? Has now left. But what that's telling us is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proclaims his decree, when he speaks his decree, and we're going to talk about what we mean by his decree, the angels, and this includes Jibreel, even Gabriel, are gripped with what? With fear, gripped with distress. And we're going to see that they're so distressed that they what? They flap their wings. In some of the narrations, they fall down prostrate. In some of the narrations, they faint. So when this happens, when Allah speaks his decree and they're gripped with this fear, they are powerless to do anything except humble themselves before their Lord in one way or another. Humble themselves by fainting. Humble themselves by falling prostrate. They're powerless to do anything else besides that. I ask you, is this the question of something, is this the description of something which should be worshipped or something that worships God? Right. This is the description of something that worships God, not something that should be worshipped instead of God. Like, so we continue. It says, فُزِّعَ عَنْ قُلُوبِهِمْ, once the fear has left their hearts. So once they recover from the effect of Allah's voice, and so they go on to say, مَاذَا قَالَ رَبُّكُمْ, what has your Lord said? Now, I want you to contemplate that they hear Allah's voice, and it causes them either to faint in some of the narrations or to fall down prostrate. They what? They flap their wings out of distress. So now when that happens, what is that telling you about your Lord? What do we learn about Allah? What do we learn about God from this part of the verse? حَتَّى فُزِّعَ عَنْ قُلُوبِهِمْ, when the distress has left from Allah speaking. Tells us one thing, that Allah speaks. Mumtaz. And when he speaks in a voice that is heard, right? Not only is it heard, but it's powerful, right? But it wouldn't be powerful unless they could actually hear it. And that's very important, because there are groups, as we're going to see, we'll talk about it briefly, we won't digress too much, but there are groups in the Islamic Ummah that basically say Allah does not speak in a voice that is heard. His kalam is what they call nafsi. It's like an internal, inaudible voice. You know how you say, for example, yesterday I was saying to myself. Now, you know, you weren't in the house going, self, yes. You know, you weren't doing that, but you said to yourself, meaning what? You spoke to yourself in an internal, inaudible voice, right? You guys see that? So they say Allah's voice is like that. It's not a voice that can be heard, but the evidence points to the contrary. You guys see that? That his voice is what? It's a voice. He has a voice. He speaks. And it's heard. And when it's heard, it has what? It has a very powerful impact on those who hear it, even though, the fourth one, it has a powerful impact upon them, even though they are themselves very large, very powerful, very strong, very formidable. They are very capable of absorbing a lot of, impact. But in spite of that, when they hear Allah's voice, they are what? They are rendered unconscious according to one of the narrations. And we have to look at, in order to really understand and wrap our heads around the power of Allah's voice, in light of what we're reading, we have to think about how Allah describes the angels themselves, how the Prophet has described them. So for example, in one verse, he described the angels as ghiladun shidat, right? In one verse, he describes them as ghiladun shidat, ghiladun, tough, rugged, formidable, powerful, forceful, strong. This is the description Allah is giving for what? His angels. We also have the description of Jibreel in Surah, I think it's Surah at-Takwir, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "The quwwatin inda dhil arshi makin." He possessing, talking about Jibreel, possessing immense strength of honorable rank with the Lord of the throne. He has a very high station with Allah. In spite of this, just rendered what? Totally powerless and in fact going unconscious. In the hadith collected by Abu Dawood on the authority of Jabir, it's also been collected by other collectors, the Prophet said, "Udhina li an uhaddith an ahadi hamalatil arsh." He says, I was given permission by Allah to inform you about one of those angels commissioned with carrying the throne of Allah. Okay, just so you know, idham, the massiveness, the sheer mass or massive size of the angels of Allah. He says, I was given permission to talk to you about the description of one of them. He said, أَنَّمَا بَيْنَ شَحْمَةَ أُذْنِهِ وَعَاتِقِهِ مَسِيرَةَ سَبْعِمِيَةِ عَامٍ. He said, between the earlobe and the shoulder of one of them is the distance of 700 years. In another version, he said 700 years as the crow flies. As the crow flies. Meaning 700, it would take a bird 700 years to fly from here to here. But that same angel does what? Faints. When they hear the sawt, when they hear the voice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just shows you how thunderous the voice of Allah is. If this is the greatness of the angels who carry the arsh, what will be the greatness of who? Of Allah himself. Of Allah himself. Of Allah himself. You guys see that? These are the people, these are the angels, the angels who carry Allah's throne. So if they're that great, what must be the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So then they say, ماذا قال ربكم? What has your Lord said? They say the truth. That they actually refers to Jibreel, actually. It refers to Jibreel. So the angels say, what has your Lord said? قالوا, they say, they is actually referring to who? Jibreel. As we're going to see from one of the narrations, Jibreel goes down to deliver the wahi. And as he goes down, descending from one heaven to another, each set of angels in each heaven asks him, ماذا قال ربكم? What has your Lord said? And Jibreel will tell them, will carry that wahi to each of those heavens. Then the Imam, he mentions the hadith of Abu Hurairah al-Bukhari, in which he says, إذا قضى الله الأمر في السماء ضربت الملائكة بأجنحتها خضعان لقوله. He says, when Allah decrees some matter, some decree in the heaven, and that decree could be kawni, it could be a universal decree. Allah decrees the death of a person, decrees the birth of a person, decrees that rain will fall on a particular strip of land, decrees that there will be an earthquake, decrees that a person will be elected president, decrees whatever, universal decree. It also could be the decree which is shar'i, where Allah decrees some legal matter in the religion, like when He revealed to the Prophet, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. It has been made lawful for you, after it was previously prohibited, it has been made lawful for you that you go unto your wives on the night of the fast. You guys see that? So whichever type of decree it is, okay, it could be this one or that one. When that happens, ضَرَبَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةُ بِأَجْنِحَتِهَا خُضَعًا لِقَوْلِهِ. The angels begin to do what? Flap their wings out of what? Complete submission and surrender to Allah and to what He is saying. Then it says, كَأَنَّهُ سِلْسِلَةٌ عَلَى صَفْوَانٍ يَنْفُذُهُمْ ذَلِكَ. And the sound that they perceive is similar as far as their perception of it. It's similar to a chain being dragged over a smooth rock. Okay? So if you take a chain and drag it over a smooth rock, and it might be hard for you guys to kind of conceptualize that. So I'll give you another example. Basically what he's saying is that the sound is so powerful and so impactful, it affects them the way that one of us would be affected if they heard a chain being dragged over a smooth rock. But that's not a great analogy for us because we're not accustomed to that sound. So I'm gonna give you a different one just to show you, or just to kind of like make it more accessible, the meaning more accessible. Imagine that somebody took their fingernails and took them down a chalkboard. Okay? All right? Then imagine that sound was pumped through an amplifier. What would that be like? What would that be like? You know what I mean? It would be almost intolerable, wouldn't it? That doesn't mean that Allah's voice sounds like that. That's not what the Prophet is saying. He's saying the effect on them is similar to the effect of that sound upon one of us. You guys see that? So he's not describing the sawt of Allah, the voice of Allah, but the effect of the hearing of it on the people who hear it. You guys see the difference? So he's not saying Allah's voice sounds like that. That's not what he's saying, because we don't know how Allah's voice sounds. But he's saying this is how it impacts the angels. You guys see that? Tayyib. So it affects them in this way. It's very, very what? Unsettling. Kind of like what? But not just that, pumped through what? An amplifier, okay? All right, so, and this is similar, if you want to make a comparison between this, it's similar to the famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, it's the hadith collected by Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Jarir ibn Abdullah al-Bajali, in which he said, إِنَّكُمْ سَتَرَوْنَ رَبَّكُمْ كَمَا تَرَوْنَ الْقَمَرَ. Or I'm sorry, تَرَوْنَ هَذَا الْقَمَرَ لَا تَضَامُونَ لِذَلِكَ, right? أو لا تضامون في رؤيته. So basically he says, you people are going to see your Lord on the day of judgment like you see what? This moon. You won't have to what? Crowd together to see it. Imagine I had there was some sporting event and there was some amazing thing that happened in the sporting event. I pulled it up on my phone, ESPN. I'm like, oh, look at that dunk that so-and-so did. And I'm like, hey, y'all got to see this. But I got my phone, right? What's going to happen for us to see it? All of us to see it together? Huh? We're going to have to crowd together because what? You got this small thing, and in order for us to see it, we have to crowd together to see that screen. But if I go outside and I say, oh, look at the full moon, right? We could all come out of separate doors. You could be over there in the courtyard. This person could be in the parking lot. I could just be coming out the front door, and we can all do what? See the moon. So what the Prophet is saying, not that the moon resembles Allah, but the way we'll see it, right? The way we'll see it resembles how we see. The way we'll see Allah will resemble the way we see the moon without what? Having the crowd together. You guys see that? So we'll go back again. He said that when Allah decrees a decree in the heavens, the angels begin to flap their wings, surrendering to Him. What does that tell you again about Allah? Same thing we said earlier. What does it tell you? That Allah, He speaks. And He speaks in a voice that is heard. Otherwise, there wouldn't, if it was just internal and internal and inaudible, it wouldn't affect them because they wouldn't hear it. They wouldn't perceive it. You guys see that? Mumtaz. All right. Then he goes on and he says, and this is going to be beneficial kind of on a side note, as we're going to see. He says, حتى إذا فزع عن قلوبهم قالوا ماذا قال ربكم قال الحق وهو العلي الكبير. It's the same thing as the ayah. When they awaken from their fainting and the fear has left them, they say, what has your Lord said? They say, He said the truth, and He is the Most High, the greatest. Then it says, فَيَسْمَعُهَا مُشْتَرِقُ السَّمَعِ وَمُشْتَرِقُ السَّمَعِ هَكَذَا بَعْضُهَا فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ. So now this is an important point. It's kind of like a digression as far as our topic goes, but it's going to be beneficial a little later on. We'll kind of touch on it a little later on. So he says that you have these eavesdroppers from the jinn, right? You have these mighty jinn who seek to eavesdrop and overhear what Allah has decreed. And the way they do it, because they don't live in the heavens, the way they do it is that they stack and stand some upon what? On top of others. You guys see that? And they keep doing that until what? Until they reach the heavens. And they try to hear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. And they do that because they have these agreements and these pacts with these earthly soothsayers and fortune tellers that we will steal some knowledge from the heavens and we'll deliver it to you. And this will make people believe that you know the future. Not because you actually have some independent power and ability to know the future, but because we have stolen what? This information from the heavens and delivered it to you. Okay, so this is what they do. They stand on top of each other and they try to overhear what Allah has said. And if they hear something from the decree, they do what? They start to pass it on. Okay, He said this, He said this, He said this, all the way until what? It reaches the one who's touching down on the earth, and he passes it to what? To the soothsayer. You guys see that? Now imagine the game of telephone. What happens in the game of telephone? Sometimes people, they maintain the general message. Isn't that true? They don't say it exactly, but they maintain the general what? The general message. Okay? So when they give it to the soothsayer, he has what? The general message. He doesn't have any details, but he's got what? The general message. But more often than not, what happens when we do telephone? It's a totally different what? Different message. And that's why when these people who do this fortune telling, you find them, they what? Well, before I get to that, the Prophet goes on to say that sometimes they hear it and they convey it. And sometimes before they hear it, they're hit by a comet or a shooting star, because Allah filled the heavens during the time of revelation. He filled the heavens with these shooting stars to do what? To prevent these eavesdroppers from stealing this information. So sometimes they're hit by these comets before they can what? They can hear. Or they hear what? Part of the message and they're hit. And sometimes they're actually able to convey the message before they are struck down. Okay? Which is why in some cases, when the soothsayer gets it, he gets part of the message. He gets part of the message, or he gets a distorted message. And this is very important for us to understand, because some of the people who believe in these soothsayers, what they'll say is, oh, well, he said this and it came to pass just like he said, or kind of like he said. They'll say what? Kind of like he said. He got it generally right. Sometimes what happens is they'll say things and the words will be inverted. So, for example, some people say, I know some of you have heard of, maybe most of you have heard of Nostradamus, right? Mm-hmm. And they say, oh, this guy's this great seer, right? Seer of the future. And he predicted so many things, to the point that they come out and say what he predicted for 2022, what he predicted. I mean, every year they're saying like these predictions are still what? Valid. And so they say, for example, he predicted the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon. They say he predicted the rise of Hitler. And so, for example, they'll look at some of the things that he wrote. And for example, there's a mention of a man who will be like this ruthless dictator born in Western Europe from poor parents, right? And he says his name is Hister. Hister. They say, oh, it's just a couple letters off. You guys see that? Hister. Exactly. So one possible explanation of this, how he got in the ballpark, is what? Them conveying what they heard and filling in before getting struck, and then filling in what? Filling in the blanks. You guys see that? That's one possible way to explain it. Al-Muhim, no one knows the unseen entirely except who? Allah. And some people may do what? Know part of the unseen from what? From their partnerships with these eavesdroppers from Al-Jinn. Tayyib. Let's look at the next one, the hadith of Nawas ibn Sam'an, which gives more clarity. Well, actually, let me just finish this one narration for the benefit. So he says, a stealthy listener hears a word which he will convey to that which is below him, and the second will convey it to that which is below him. To the last of them will convey it to the wizard or fortune teller. Sometimes a flame or fire may strike the devil before he can convey it, and sometimes he may convey it before the flame strikes him, whereupon the wizard adds to that a word of 100 lies. The people will then say, didn't he, the fortune teller, tell us such and such thing on such and such date? Didn't he get it right that one time? So that magician is said to have told the truth because of the statement which has been heard from the heavens. So that statement that was stolen from the heavens, that he did get right, he'll be considered to be a truthful person and a seer like this Nostradamus, even though he told 100 what? 100 lies. He was wrong 100 times, right one time, and isn't a clock right? I'm saying isn't a broken clock right twice a day? You guys see that? Yeah. All right. So in the hadith of Nawas ibn Sam'an, he said, إذا أراد الله تعالى أن يوحي بالأمر تكلم بالوحي أخذت السماوات منه رجفة أو قال رعدة. So he says that basically, he says that the heavens will shake and quake as a consequence of Allah speaking out of fear of Allah. So now I want you to think for a second, Allah speaks and the heavens shake when he speaks. I mean, the heavens are housing the angels. And not just, a handful of angels. There's a hadith where the Prophet said there's something called Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur, which is like this masjid in the heavens. And he said that this, I forget the number, but it's 70,000 angels enter that Bayt and they worship in that house of worship every day. And this is until what? Until the end of time. 70,000 go in, and that 70,000 that goes in will never return again. They'll never return again. So 70,000 every day, 70,000, 70,000. And the angels, you heard the description, how large they are, how powerful they are, etc. and so on, right? And the heavens are housing these angels. And these heavens, how strong must they be? Think of the strongest building. Just what do you think? What's the strongest building you think in the world? Strongest structure, most solid, fortified structure. What do you think it would be? Freedom Tower? Freedom Tower? Where's the Freedom Tower at?
Where the Twin Towers was.
Really?
Yeah.
Freedom Tower in New York.
They got knocked out. Well, they got blown up anyway. That's a conversation for another day. They were like planned demolition, right? Okay. Give me something else. Something else. You just think it's like, what would we say? The pyramids? Pyramids? You want to go with the pyramids? Okay. So, the clock tower in Mecca. Okay. Just think about the most fortified and strongest structures you can think that it would take tons of, dynamite to bring them down. Okay. That's nothing compared to what? The heavens. But those heavens, as strong as they are, as mighty they are, as well as they're able to house all of these angels, they do what? They shake when Allah speaks. Come on, think about the greatness of Allah. We have to reflect upon this, because if we really reflect upon the greatness of Allah, it's going to affect how we worship Him. It's going to affect how we move, how we, our ability to obey Him, to avoid sinning against Him. When we think about what the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب. So he says the heavens quake, and when the inhabitants, it says when the inhabitants of the heavens, when they hear it, they are shocked and they fall prostrate. They are shocked, they faint, and they what? They fall prostrate. Then it says the first of them to raise his head is the angel Gabriel, whom Allah speaks out the revelation to and tells him what he wishes. So all the other angels are what? They're passed out, they're prostrate, and angel Gabriel raises his head, and Allah will do what? Give him the revelation. Then it says, when Gabriel passes by the other angels in different heavens, he is asked at each station, at each heaven, he's asked, ماذا قال ربكم? What has our Lord said? He answers, قال الحق وهو العلي الكبير. He has said the truth, and he is the most high, the most great. And every heaven, they repeat the same thing. Then Gabriel moves on to the destination with the revelation we're commanded by Allah, the Most High. Then he takes the revelation to wherever Allah has told him to take it. So these are the three texts that he gave, and all of them, they convey a single message, or they teach us a single very important fact as it relates to associating partners with Allah, or the arguments that people use to justify associating partners with Allah. And what is that? What is that? Somebody help me with that. What's the primary message from these three texts, the ayah and these two hadith, the hadith of Abu Hurairah and the hadith of Nawas?
They just have no power without Allah.
Mumtaz. And if they have no power with Allah, even though they're what? The most virtuous, they're the most immense in strength, and they have these massive physical forms. If they, with all of these qualities, are not worthy of worship, and in fact they themselves worship Allah and humble themselves before Allah, flap their wings out of distress, faint because of the thunderous voice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and fall prostrate, if this is the case for them and they themselves worship Allah, is it appropriate for us or anyone to worship anything less than them in rank? It just doesn't make sense. And this is what the Imam is trying to achieve by saying this, or by mentioning these texts. The Imam, he says, Fihi Masail. What time is Maghrib today?
7:20. It's 10. It's 11.
Oh, I'm talking about 7.
Oh.
8:10, really?
No, is it? In 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. So, okay, we're going to have to stop, because what I got to start doing is speaking for a little more than half and giving the rest for discussion. So since we have about 5 minutes, any questions or comments, Ikhwan? The main thing we wanted to say, we said it. Any questions or comments? Otherwise, there's one thing I did want to kind of comment on. Any questions, comments, discussion, anything?
No questions there.
Okay, no questions there. None on Facebook. I can see. At-Tawheed, Sheikh. What do you have?
About Angel Gabriel.
Hey. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
When the Prophet Sallallahu
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
from Mecca to Medina,
Hey.
and from the Jews, and they asked him, because they knew they have book, and they asked him, what do you consider about Gabriel? He says, this is the angel of Wahy.
Hey.
This is the angel of also Allah Azza wa Jalla gave them this order for the punishment for the
Hey.
Oh, has aduna.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
This is our enemy.
Yeah, when the Prophet met when he first came to Medina and he met a party of the Jews, they asked him, what do you say about Gabriel? And he responded saying, Gabriel is this, and this. He started praising him and talking about he's the one who brings al-Wahy, and he's the one who brings Allah's punishment, etc. and so on. They said, oh, this is our enemy. This is what the Jews said about Gabriel. There's actually a verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Man kana aduwan li Jibreel wa Mikaela wa Israel. Right. So he says, and whoever is a enemy of Gabriel and Michael and the angels of Allah, then Allah is an enemy to those disbelievers, right? Allah is an enemy to those disbelievers. Whoever takes them as an enemy, Allah is their enemy. All right, really quickly, I just want to hit on that point about the soothsayers and fortune tellers. And he mentions a few masail that are related to that. So I'll just read those out. And if there's any comment, we'll take that. So he says, starting from point number 15, he says, sometimes the soothsayer may relay the truth. It's not unheard of for the people who claim to be fortune tellers and people who know the future and people who can read your palm to say the truth. Okay? And just to explain, there's two types of ghaib. There's two types of unseen. There's what they call al-ghaib al-mutlaq, right? Just the completely and totally unseen, right? And there's al-ghaib al-nisbi. There is al-ghaib, which is, it's unseen for some people and seen for others. For example, right now there's someone out there in the hallway. They could be praying, they could be reading the Quran, they could be sending a text message. That is a ghaib for what? For us. But it's not a ghaib for the sheikh. He's standing right there and he can see what they're doing. You guys see that? That's what they call ghaiba an-nisbi. This ghaib can be known by your qareen, your companion from the jinn, right? Or the companions of others. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. So for example, let's say a person went to a soothsayer and they sat down and they said, I want to see if this guy really knows what he's talking about. So you'll say, for example, tell me something about myself. Show me that you really know something. So he'll start saying, yeah, this morning you went and you bought a coffee from Starbucks and this was the coffee that you bought, right? And after you got the coffee, you went to work and you had like this unpleasant altercation with your boss, right? He's like, how'd you know that? How did he know it? How did he know that? No, the boss didn't tell him. Who told him? You have a companion and that one has a companion. And those two companions can do what? They can communicate. You guys see that? And that ghaib is what? Is nisbi. It's something which is known to some and not known to others, but it's known to some. It's not something that's completely unseen. Your boss knows about it and his qareen knows about it. Your qareen knows about it. And your qareen can communicate with the qareen of the soothsayer and reveal that information. You guys see that? So we can't be fooled by that. But some people are. You also have al-ghaib al-mutlaq, which is that what? That decree of Allah, right? That decree of Allah. And we talked about how they can have that information. Because sometimes you have these eavesdroppers who steal that information and pass it on to them. They get some of it right and they get most of it wrong. So he says, sometimes the soothsayer may relay the truth. The soothsayer mixes the truth with 100 lies. Then he says, his lies would not be believed if not for the word of truth which was heard from the heaven. You guys see that? If he didn't get it right once, nobody would believe him. But because he gets it right once, they forget about what? All the times he got it wrong. You guys see that? The acceptance of falsehood by the human nature, that it's human nature to accept falsehood, how they hang on to one truth and don't consider the 100 lies. And so what the Imam is saying is that it's not befitting for us, as intelligent as we are, created to what? Be people who think, who we don't take a step back and look at the whole what? The whole body of work, right? Somebody does one thing, that's what? Amazing. But the rest of what they do is awful. And we allow ourselves to be fooled, to be bamboozled by what? By that one truth. Despite the fact that they told what? Many lies. And then he says how they pass the word to one another, memorize it, and use it as an evidence for other lies. They'll say, for example, oh, he knows the unseen. He knows the unseen. Why? Because he said one thing truthful. But what about all the things that he said that were lies? And also, what about the explanations that Allah has given us and the Messenger has given us for the one truth that he knew? So when he told me about the Starbucks, come on. Yeah, there's two what? Two qareens here talking to each other. This qareen said, I was with me when I went to Starbucks. He said, yeah, he went to Starbucks. And he bought this kind of coffee. And he went to work and him and his boss, they had it out. right? And so the guy says that, and we understand, we know, now that we know this, we know how that happens. And so we're not fooled by that. Similarly, when he says hister, we know how that happened. It happened because what? As this jinn was trying to convey what he heard, he got blasted and said part of it and left the part, and the other jinn had to do what? Fill in the blank. Fill in the blank. And did what? Inverted some of the words, or, replaced a syllable with a different syllable, etc. and so on. Like, any questions, comments?
There's one thing that I guess at the time of
Hey.
and one of those people, I mean, he came to him and say, sir, I want to tell you something. I know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
He said, how? I said, okay. Can you please catch some stones? He said, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So can you please count it? Or I want to see, can you count it? He said, yes, okay. I can tell you how much. And he tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So he got confused.
Mm-hmm.
Then he asked Shaykh al-Islam
Ibn Taymiyyah.
Someone he said, okay, Shaykh al-Islam, he knows the trick.
Mm-hmm.
He said, okay, I'm coming. And he asked this guy, do you know the unseen? He said, of course I know.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. So how? He said, okay, take some stones. He said, I took it. He took some, so count it. And he put it, said, I counted. So how much he didn't know. So he got like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he explained it to Al-Mamun, Al-Khalifa Al-Mamun. He said, okay, when I took the punch of the stone, I never counted.
Mm-hmm.
He said, why? Because if I counted, my
Qareen will know, yeah.
He counted with them and he will tell his
Qareen.
Mm-hmm. This is the only thing.
Hey.
No one knows that.
Allah al-Musta'an. And the other thing too is, what's very important for us as we close out, is that there's going to be some things that are going to happen around us that we can't explain. And sometimes those things will make us, in the first instance that we experience those things, will make us start to question certain things that we know from the Quran. What we have to do is we have to be certain that everything that Allah has told us and everything in the authentic Sunnah is 100% true. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعِنْدَهُ مَفَاتِحُ الْغَيْبِ لَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا هُ, and he possesses, meaning God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses the keys of the unseen. No one knows them except him. And then he mentions what they are. Allah tells me that, and something like this happens. How did you know I went to Starbucks? How do you know I ordered? I don't know what I don't generally go to Starbucks, but I don't know.
Vanilla sweet cream cold brew.
Which one?
Vanilla sweet cream cold brew.
Vanilla sweet cream cold brew. All right. Somebody goes all the time. All right. So how do you know I ordered that? Right? And it can get a person off their spot. But what we always have to do is what? There's an explanation for this. Why? Because Allah doesn't lie. He says nobody knows the keys to the unseen except him. So even though I can't explain it, I have confidence that what? There is an explanation. And I don't have to know the explanation in order for there to be an explanation. You guys see that? As they say, عَدَمُ الْعِلْمِ لَيْسَ عِلْمًا بِالْعَدَمِ. The fact that you don't know the answer is not a proof that there's no answer. You guys see that? You guys see that? This is very, very important for us, because you have people nowadays with letters behind their name who are questioning the Quran because they don't have an answer for something. They don't have an answer for something. The fact that you don't have an answer for it doesn't mean there's no answer. It just shows that what? Our intellect is limited. Our research is sometimes lacking. We don't do enough research. We don't dig deep enough. But there is an answer, because Allah does not lie. And His Quran is absolutely true. And with that, we'll bring it to a close. Tafadhal, Shaykh.
Are you ready to adjust the start time?
Do you want to push it back?
Well, I'm just suggesting to you. Next week, Salah is going to be like right after 8. So
Right after 8. Yeah, it won't be 30 minutes. I'm glad you said that. Okay, what?
Before that, week after following that, it's going to be within the 7 o'clock hour.
Really? Yeah, so we have to push it back then. We could go back to 7. We were at 7 and we went to 7:30 because we just had too much time. So starting next week, we'll go back to 7. And we'll ride that for a couple weeks or a month maybe.
Until time change?
Yeah, because we don't want it to be too long. And what I have to do is I'm gonna have to have somebody do a timer. We'll cut the time in half. We'll talk for that half. The other half we'll just what? We'll have a discussion like this. So inshallah next week 7 p.m. بإذن الله. جزاك الله خير حبيب. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.